Hi, I'm Carrie Leland, nutritionist with Imbalanced Nutrition and the Foxhall Foundation. So today we're going to be wrapping up our series on energy providing nutrients with our third and final nutrient, fat. So over the course of the past few decades, our perception of dietary fat has changed a lot. Back in the 80s and 90s, people were advised to limit total fat in their diet. Fat in the diet was associated with weight gain, and it was associated with an increased risk of heart disease. We didn't distinguish between different types of fats. Fat was all sort of grouped together, and it was all bad. And so people were encouraged to eat as little dietary fat as possible. But we actually need fat in our diet. It's important for a lot of different functions in our body, things like cushioning and insulating our organs, things like absorbing nutrients like our fat-soluble vitamins, things like the creation of hormones. We even use some fat as energy. So we definitely have to have an adequate amount of fat in our diet, and we need it in a larger amount than you would probably guess. So about 20 to 35% of our total calorie intake each day should be coming from fat. The important thing to remember, just like with carbohydrates and like with protein, it's when we consume too much of the wrong types of fats that we see an increase in those adverse health outcomes. So there are two types of fats. There are our saturated fats and our unsaturated fats. So our saturated fats are more often associated with those adverse health outcomes. So saturated fats can contribute to increased cholesterol levels, particularly our LDL cholesterol levels. They can also contribute to inflammation, which can help to increase plaque buildup in our arteries, among a lot of other things. And so we want to try to keep the amount of saturated fat in our diet as low as we can. So saturated fat is going to come mostly from our animal sources. So things like meat, dairy products, eggs, those are all going to be sources of saturated fat. Now, not all of those sources are created equally when we're talking about saturated fats. So when we have a food item that is higher in total fat, it's going to provide us with more saturated fat. So for example, a whole milk is going to provide more saturated fat than a 2% milk because whole milk is higher in overall total fat. The same thing goes when we're talking about different meats and the amount of saturated fat that they contain. So something like a ground beef with a high percentage of fat is going to provide more saturated fat than a chicken breast. And that's just related to the overall total fat content. So the leaner your meat, the less saturated fat that you'll get from that meat. The lower the fat in your dairy product, the less saturated fat that you'll get from that product. Certainly that doesn't mean that we can never eat beef, that we have to eat only chicken, but if you're able to pick a leaner cut of beef, one with less visible fat, one with less marbling, a ground beef that has a lower percentage of fat, then you will be reducing your overall saturated fat intake. Same thing even with poultry, a chicken breast versus a chicken thigh that is dark meat and has more fat. If you're eating the skin on the chicken breast, which contains more of the fat, you're going to get more of the saturated fat that way. So anytime that you can choose an animal product that is lower in fat, you're going to reduce your overall saturated fat intake. Now, our unsaturated fats are found primarily in our plant products. So things like vegetable oils, things like nuts and seeds, those are all great sources of unsaturated fats. So as opposite of saturated fats, our unsaturated fats actually help to reduce inflammation and to increase those good cholesterol numbers, those HDL cholesterol numbers. So ideally, it's great to get most of the fat in your diet from these unsaturated sources. So, things like avocado, things like almonds, walnuts, soybeans. Those are all great sources of plant-based fats or unsaturated fats. Including a combination of both of those types of fats really can help to add a lot of balance to your diet. So also another thing I like to focus on when we're talking about unsaturated fats are two specific types of unsaturated fats. So most of the fatty acids that we have in our body, that we need in our body to accomplish those different functions that I mentioned, are things that our body can make on its own from fats that we already have. But there are two types of fats that it is essential that we actually get from the foods that we eat. And those are our omega-6 fatty acids and our omega-3 fatty acids. So omega-6 fatty acids are going to be found in a lot of our vegetable oils. They're going to be found in things like nuts and seeds. And because of the fact that a lot of the foods that we eat do contain some vegetable oils, unfortunately, a lot of the processed foods that we eat do have some of those vegetable oils. Generally, we're able to meet our omega-6 fatty acid requirement pretty easily. So we don't have to focus so much on that. But our omega-3s are a little bit more challenging sometimes for people to get adequate amounts of. So our omega-3 fatty acids are found in things like fish, fatty fish like salmon. They're also found in nuts. Specifically, walnuts are an excellent source of omega-3 fatty acids. They're found in things like flaxseed and things like chia seeds and hemp seeds, which are all really excellent things that you can add to yogurt or cereal or salads to increase your omega-3 fatty acid intake. So, incorporating those things can help to make sure that you're getting those needs met. So ultimately what we want to do, just like with our protein and with our carbohydrate, is focus on making sure that the majority of the fat in our diet is coming from the healthiest sources, unsaturated sources, and then also those animal products, those animal sources that are lower in fat, that are going to provide a lower amount of saturated fat. So please go and enjoy some delicious unsaturated fats today, some nuts or some nut butters, and join me for our next talk soon.